Okay. Her research focuses on differential geometry and applications of geometry to the study of differential equations, and more recently on mathematical topics related to redistricting. Dr. Cleland is the author of the textbook From Frenet to Cartan, The Method of Moving Frames, and she is the 2018 winner of the Burton W. Jones Distinguished Teaching Award from the Rocky Mountain Mathematical Association of America. So very impressive credentials. And then Dr. Beth Mounskop, who we are also pleased to say is a member of our Colorado League Board, State Board, is an assistant professor in the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science at Colorado College. Her research is in number theory, algebraic geometry, and applied discrete mathematics. She began working on mathematical aspects of fair redistricting in 2019, and Dr. Mounskop has earned her PhD at Colorado State University. She serves on the board of directors, as I said, of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Carlos Perez, who is the chair of the Colorado Independent Legislative Commission, resides in Colorado Springs and is a full-time software engineer. He is a civic volunteer helping local nonprofits, and he currently serves on the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority Citizens Advisory Committee. In 2020, he served as chairman of the Colorado Springs City Council Districting Process Advisory Committee, and in 2022, he began serving as chairman of the Colorado Independent Legislative Redistricting Commission. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to these individuals. And if you do have questions, please put those in, post those in the chat. Beth, do you want to begin, or?
I think Carlos is first up for us. So Carlos, if you want to find, go ahead and take over and share your screen. That would be great.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Perez. I am the chair, or was the chair, I'm still not quite sure, of the Colorado Independent Legislative Redistricting Commission. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today to kind of do a quick look back at our redistricting effort. I also want to, before I begin, just thank the League of Women Voters, who I just recently became a member of the Pikes Peak chapter. One of the, because I really believe in the mission that the League has provided.
Carlos, your sound just got really quiet.
Oh, can you hear me all right?
Not really.
Just hold on just a moment. Let me check. Oh, wait a minute. Can you guys hear me now? Better? Somehow my microphone went down. Anyways, I just wanted to.
Nope. Just faded out again.
Just clicked off again.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay, if it fades out, just go ahead and please let me know. It looks like I'm having some computer problems myself. I just wanted to thank the League.
Well, what I have found sometimes we can't hear you again is that there's a Zoom like auto change volume setting that you might need to play with. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, give me just a moment. Sorry for the delay. I have not had this problem before with Zoom, but you said there's an auto setting here in here at the audio settings. Here we go. Automatically adjust microphone volume. Can you hear me okay? Not yet. All right, how's that?
That's good.
It looks like I'm fighting the Zoom application here. Yeah, it seems like it's, thank you very much for that tip on the microphone. I'm sorry about that. But anyways, what I was trying to say is I wanted to thank the League for all the work that they have done to promote independent redistricting here in Colorado and across the nation. And what I'm going to do is, let me go ahead and share my screen. And I just have a presentation here that I can, okay, share screen. Whoops. Okay. All right. let's see if this works a little better here. So, yeah, again, my name is Carlos Pettis, and just going to go, this is going to be in two parts, and I'll go through this as quickly as I can. One would just be a look back, just a review of the work that the Legislative Redistricting Commission did over last year in 2021, and also kind of looking forward and kind of the work that the League will be providing or helping or assisting. And I will be turning that over to Dr. Momskov and Dr. Cleland to kind of just gives us a kind of an overview of some of the loose ends that we need to take care of going forward with redistricting. So let me just introduce myself. As I said, I'm a full-time software engineer. I'm a resident of Colorado Springs for 28 years. I am an unaffiliated voter, incidentally. I'm not a Democrat or Republican voter, but I am an unaffiliated voter. And this is an interesting opportunity for unaffiliated voters to be involved in redistricting. It was quite the experience. In 2020, as I said before, I was the chairman of the Colorado Springs City Council Districting Process Advisory Committee, where I helped with redistricting the city council districts. And in 2021, I was selected to be on the commission, and my colleagues, my other 11 commissioners, selected me as chairman of the commission. So it was an honor and a privilege to serve them, as well as the citizens of Colorado. So I'll just go through this very quickly. Hopefully everybody knows what redistricting is and reapportionment and how the census works. This is something that we have to do every 10 years to redraw our legislative boundaries as well as the congressional boundaries. And I'm just going to go, again, just very quickly through this. If there's any questions, please go ahead and ask. But we had to draw 100 legislative districts, 35 Senate seats and 65 House districts for Colorado, for the legislative side. The history of this, and again, this is where the League was instrumental and was the leader to get this on the ballot. Back in 2018, the voters approved Amendments Y, which is independent redistricting for the congressional seat, and Amendment Z, which is where I served, which is legislative redistricting. So I think the process worked, I think this is a model for the rest of the country, and of course for Colorado for redistricting these independent commissions, especially when we have unaffiliated commissioners on it, like myself. Certainly was a positive for redistricting. There are 12 of us, and just go quick, I was one of the 12, as well as the chair. And how I was selected, if you guys were wondering, there was a rather involved process for selecting our commissioners. I was actually selected among a pool of a vetted pool of 50 unaffiliated voters through the judicial selection, but there was also a random selection as well. And so we had half that were selected randomly and half that were selected by a judicial panel. I was part of that judicial panel selection. The timeline, just briefly here, I'll just go quickly here, is that we had we convened back in March 30th last year. We convened our commission, we were seated, we had to go through the adoption of our commission rules. The first thing that was out the gate was our preliminary plan. That was in the end of June. And we took that preliminary plan around the state. We conducted a number of public hearings, actually a lot of public hearings, virtual meetings and in person. Right around that time, at the end of August, the census data was finally released. And with that, we were able to put together the staff plans, as they were called, the various plans that we had been taken to the public. First staff plan, second plan. So they just came in rapid succession. It was drinking out of a fire hose to work with these plans. The middle of October, October 12th, our final plan, both for the Senate and the House, were completed. They were submitted by the Supreme Court, and then on the middle of November, the Supreme Court accepted our redistricting plan. And now, currently, today, we went to the Secretary of State, and today our clerks and recorders are going through a process called re-precincting, and that's what's happening as we speak at the county level. So a lot of changes. Won't talk about the criteria. Let me just kind of go over that. Let me just go briefly over our public process, because this is something that was an innovation, I believe. And when I call it innovation, this is something that was new, that was added to the Constitution, was to have a inclusive and meaningful process that included hearing from the public. And so we have had a lot of input from the public, and I want to thank the league for actually participating and helping us with that, getting the word out. I wanted to say, as the chair, my focus was on the public. At the very center, when we talk about public participation, the very center, the focus is the public. I'm just one of the spokes in the wheel here, but the very center is the public. The commissioners, our nonpartisan staff, and the public had access to a number of tools, our website portal, communication, email, our public hearings, and so forth. But the focus of our public participation, well, of course, was the public. And so they were the center of what was driving our process. So I wanted to make that very clear, that this innovation of having the public participate in our process here was crucial to generating fair maps. By the numbers, we had 45 meetings, 6,000 comments come in. We had 35 public hearings all over the state. We had hundreds of emails, and this was just my count. 480 came in through our email inbox and website file attachments. And there were about 600 citizen maps that were submitted through our gallery. So we had quite a bit of input into a lot of public interaction. And these are by, like I said, by the numbers here. Finally, we got our maps, and I'll just go quickly. If you haven't seen reviewed our maps or know what's going on, we do have Senate districts have been redrawn, and our House districts has also been redrawn. We have the 35 Senate and the 65 House districts. So under the hood, how did these get here? And this is where I'm going to turn it over to our Dr. Cleland and Dr. Malmskov. And I'm just going to highlight, we have a number of criteria in our Constitution now. One of them is competitiveness. And what that means is that a competitive district is one that has a reasonable potential for the party affiliation to change at least once between the census, between the decennial census here. And we can measure that in a number of ways. The Constitution gives us some guidelines on there. And also the other thing we needed to do is, when it came to competitiveness, also listen to the public. What was their thoughts on how we would actually go about measuring this or evidence for competitiveness? We did two things. One of them was determine what was called this Partisan Index. And I won't go into, I'm going to just kind of go very quickly here, but there was some math that went into this. We did actually have some mathematicians that were recommended by Dr. Rebecca Theobald at UCCS in a geocivics program, recommended some mathematicians that could help us with determining what we call the swingingness of a hypothetical district map. There was a number of meetings and analysis that went into this, and we finally came on to this, what we call the index, or partisan index, was 8.5. And you'll see that in the newspapers or media, but we came up and found that we had a 8.5% between Republicans and Democrats created a Republican, for voting outcomes, created a competitive district. That, if you just look in the literature, it can be between 10%. The media is using 5%. So we settle on 8.5%. But I just wanted to just highlight that. The other thing that we did, and one of the first things to do, is detecting partisan bias. Did we have fair maps, and can we analyze this mathematically? And this is where I'll just kind of not steal the thunder from Dr. Cleland and Dr. Malmskov. But when we hired them, they actually were under contract with the commission to provide this analysis called Ensemble analysis. And they helped us understand this partisan bias and competitiveness from a mathematical perspective. The other thing that they did, and I really thought this was great, they helped us understand Hispanic voting age population and how that fits in, because we also have a responsibility to ensure that minorities are represented, Hispanics are represented in our maps, in our efforts. So they did some work there, as well as understanding this notion of drilling down a toss-up district. So it was quite an interesting, enlightening educational experience, understanding these other factors that go into drawing maps. With that, I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Cleland and Dr. Malmskov, unless somebody has any questions for me before I turn it over to them. Any questions? And I'm not sure exactly how to do this. I'm going to hit the unshare button, but I don't know if we want to take questions now or later. Questions. Yeah.
There is one question in the chat. When will individuals be able to find out what congressional district they are actually in?
The congressional district. So the question is, will individuals be able to find out what congressional districts they're in? Okay, so the Secretary of State's office, and I'm going to try to, maybe someone can help me there, but there's actually Go Vote Colorado. You type in your address and it will show you your, not only your congressional district, but also your legislative districts too. With that, I don't know if it's up and running now. You can also go to redistricting.colorado.gov and you can actually just pull up the map and you can see what the boundaries are. So the boundaries are, the maps are actually published, and the tools probably will be ready in another, I would say maybe another 2 or 3 months, where you can actually type in your address. But for the congressional side, I'm going to say on the congressional side, we did add one congressional district, and that was the 8th congressional district, and that's on the north of Denver, and that was added.
Thank you.
Go vote Colorado.gov. Okay, thank you so much. And I don't know if it's working yet for the new congressional districts, but it should be, before you vote, should be up and running. Anything else? End of January, looks like February. Okay, so re-precincting is occurring, should be done this month and next month. Well, let me turn over to Dr. Cleland, Dr. Momskov. They're up.
Thanks very much, Carlos. I think I'm up to give the first part of the presentation that Dr. Cleland and I are giving. So let me just get that shared, as one does here. Oops. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Beth Malmskog, member of the League of Women Voters of Colorado board, as well as proud member of the Pikes Peak region here. We're going to talk just briefly about the tool that we used to try and look at competitiveness and partisan bias and some other things for the commission. I will try and be quick here, but do please stop me if you have any questions at all. Basically, what we were charged to do by the commission, Carlos has explained, but sort of one of the major questions we're asked to address is there a way that we could, as mathematicians, help measure partisan bias to make sure that the maps that were drawn did not display partisan bias? And so the fundamental question for folks like us is, like, how do you measure something like this in a way that will people can really understand and will satisfy courts, independent commissions, and such. So there's a few ideas that I'm going to run through. None of these are what we use. I'll explain the idea that we use at a little more length. So one of the first things that people think about when they're trying to think about whether a district has been gerrymandered is it a really ugly shape? So intuitively, we might think fair districts are nice, and manipulated districts for partisan gain for some party will be ugly and sort of convoluted. However, that has been a historical demonstration of gerrymandering, like, oh, look at how ugly this district is. It is probably ugly for a reason. But what we found more recently is that, especially with sort of newer technologies, it's possible to engineer districts for partisan gain while not creating particularly convoluted looking districts. So as a quick example, this is North Carolina, and these are the 2012 and 2016 congressional districts for North Carolina. You'll notice that the ones on the left look kind of crazy, the ones on the right do not. However, they have the exact same partisan balance when you check how many districts are majority for each party here. And this was an open gerrymander. So this is just to demonstrate that compactness can't be really your one measure of whether districts are drawn fairly or not. Okay, so another idea that people often have right off the bat is proportionality. You might expect fair districts to result in a seat share for each party that's about the same as the share of the vote that that party received. Another idea, sort of more mathy, is this notion of partisan symmetry. This was introduced by a couple of political scientists in the 80s. And the idea is that if a districting plan is fair, how one party performs with a certain vote share should be about the same as how the other party would perform if they had the same vote share. Okay, so that's an interesting idea. Another interesting idea, more recent, is this efficiency gap, also introduced by a couple of political scientists much more recently. And this is based on the idea of how gerrymandering happens, of cracking and packing. So the idea is that you would like the other party to waste votes. And so if the two parties, if somebody has successfully gerrymandered, then they will have caused one party to waste many more votes than the other party has. And we sort of can measure that through a simple mathematical formula. Okay, so these are some ways that people have come up with to measure partisan bias. They all have strengths, but they also all have weaknesses. And the major weakness that causes problems is that failures to come to the ideal in these metrics can come from just the way people live in this particular human geography of the state rather than deliberate gerrymandering. So just as a quick example, consider Massachusetts. So for 3 of the last census cycles, Massachusetts has 9 or 10 seats in the US House of Representatives. So Republicans usually get 30 to 40% of the vote, but no Republican has actually had a congressional seat from Massachusetts since 1994. So this looks particularly out of proportion. Like the number of seats that the party gets is way out of proportion with the number of votes that the party gets statewide. So is this due to gerrymandering? Well, in fact, it's not. I think somebody's got a background music on there somewhere. Okay, sounds like it's gone. Yeah, so what we can do is apply some science, and math to this and just see if we can figure out whether this is due to gerrymandering or not. So Moon Duchin, who's a mathematician who's worked in this area extensively, she and her group analyzed precinct level voting data for 13 elections in the range from 2000 to 2016. And basically what they did was try and combine precincts to create the most Republican possible district that you could make in Massachusetts, right? Add up precincts to till you got to the population required for a district. And those in this map would be all of the pink and red districts that you see. So this is not a valid district. It's not contiguous. It's not one piece. But if you could make the most Republican possible district, it would have to be less Republican than this, which is just all of the Republican precincts. And what they find is that, in fact, you can't make a majority Republican district. There's actually no way, even when you take the most Republican precincts from across the state, they still are majority Democratic. And what we see here is that what happens is that Republicans in Massachusetts are really spread out. They're spread out evenly across the state in such a way that even though they form a significant minority of the population, it's impossible to get enough Republicans in any geographic region to get majority in that region. And so what we see is that the fact that no Republican has won a seat in Massachusetts since for many years now is not due to partisan gerrymandering, it's just due to the way people live and vote in the state. Okay, so if we had looked at this through the lens of proportionality or many of these other measures, we might have seen like, oh, this looks funny, but in fact, by looking carefully at the actual votes on the ground, we see that it's not a sign of partisan bias after all. Okay, so we need a new idea that'll help us understand cases like Massachusetts, and really every state is its own story, just like Massachusetts is. So the big idea is sampling and ensemble analysis, which is devised by mathematicians and political scientists. And the idea, the broad idea here is based on randomly drawn maps and statistical sampling. So basically you want to create a really large collection, thousands or millions of randomly generated valid districting plans. So for each plan, then we're going to overlay real voting data with it and figure out which party, because this focuses mostly on Democratic and Republican votes, since those are the main winners in these elections. So for each plan, we figure out which of those two parties is in the majority in each of the prospective districts. And then we can see what the sort of outcome of one of these actual elections would have been under one of those plans. So then we just create a histogram, basically a bar chart showing the frequency of various outcomes. And by looking at this over thousands or millions of plans, we can get a picture of what's likely for districts drawn without partisan bias and get a little context of what's normal for the state. So if a proposed districting plan, when we overlay the same voting data on it, is an extreme outlier, then this suggests that the plan is probably not representative of what is normal for the state, okay? And it could be a sign that the plan has been drawn with partisan bias. It could also be that the ensemble that has been drawn is not representative for the state, or for what you would get in the state if you draw the plans with the priorities that the map drawers did. And that's something that we can parse a little more closely a little later on. Okay, so just as a very quick example, so you can get this in your head. The idea is, like, imagine that we had this as our very simplified toy model of a state. We've got 100 voters and we know how they voted. In real life, this would be replaced with a precinct map of the state, and we would know the vote totals for each of those precincts in the state. So if there's 100 voters here and we'd like to divide it into 10 districts, since there's 40 orange voters, you might think that orange should win 4 of these districts. Well, if we actually try drawing some plans, we see that we get a range of outcomes. This first way of drawing the districts gives us 2.5 seats for orange. This other very simple way gives us 1.5, the 0.5 being a toss-up seat where it's 5 and 5. Here you can draw a kind of careful plan to get 4 seats for orange. Here you draw a plan with 6 seats for orange. So you can see there's a range of possibilities of what could happen. Okay, so what is normal for the state? Well, 4 maps isn't enough to tell us. If we do 100,000 districting plans, that might be enough to tell us a little bit more about what's normal. Okay, so if we drew 100,000 random plans, this is our histogram, our bar chart of what the outcomes are. And we see that 2.5 seats is really the most common thing to happen for the way that these voters are distributed. The range from 1 to 4 or 4.5 seats shows up, but that 6-seat outcome, that was an outlier, right? That was something that you should maybe watch out for a little bit. Okay, so here's our team, myself, Dr. Cleland, Dr. Flavio Sancier-Barbosa, my colleague at Colorado College, and Dr. Daryl DeFord, who is currently at Washington State University. So in our work for the Colorado Independent Redistricting Commission, Legislative Redistricting Commission, that is, we also did congressional work to share with the public, but we're going to focus on the legislative work right this minute. Our districts and our plans are built from precincts. And we make a mathematical object called a graph that basically just describes the precinct map. So just as a quick primer on these things, each precinct will be represented by a dot, and anytime the precincts share a border, we'll put an edge in there. So doing that, we create a structure like this that basically captures all the information in a sort of nice little package about how people voted in each precinct of Colorado and how those precincts are connected to each other. This is the real precinct for Colorado, or the real map for Colorado. So then basically what we do in a nutshell is break this graph up into an appropriate number of pieces, which will represent the districts. Okay, and we make sure that there's a balanced population in each one, and we have an algorithm that can help us work for, or make sure that these districts are balanced, or sorry, not balanced, are as compact as possible and satisfy some of the criteria that the commissions needed to satisfy. Okay, so if that, we'll be able to determine which districts are valid this way, and we have an algorithm that runs nicely and sort of sets up for better districts that are more reflective of what the criteria are. Okay, so I think here I'll hand it over to Dr. Cleland so that she can continue and tell you a little bit more about the particulars of our work.
All right, well, thanks for getting us started, Carlos and Beth. And let me find the right window on my screen, which is always the fun part. All right, and if I change my view to, wait a minute. I want to make this full screen. Why am I not seeing that? Enter full screen, there we go. That's weird, that's not how I want that to go. You know what, I'm gonna bring this up in another application. Give me just a sec. Stop this share and do it better.
Beth, while we're waiting for Jean to bring up her slides, there is a question in chat that asks that there is a methodology that has been used for a number of years. Did you use these?
Yeah, so I think that there's lots of different, I would love to, there's a lot of different ways that people have tried to measure partisan bias. And I tried to lay out a few of those. This one has been in use since the maybe probably the last several years, I would say, maybe the last 5 or 7 years to try and measure partisan bias in court cases and things like that. So that we use the methodology that people have been using there, sort of like the one that is being applied currently in a lot of different court cases, trying to challenge redistricting plans as well. So I'm not sure which one you're referring to there. I could hear more about the details of what you're thinking. But yes, we're using a technique that has been applied broadly in the last probably 5 to 7 years.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, can everybody see this now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So what we did specifically for the commission, so of course we had districts for both the state house and the state senate. And so using this idea of creating a large random sample of plans, we created an ensemble of 2 million plans for each of those chambers. And the constraints that we tried to build into the plans in our ensemble, a lot of these are dictated by what the law and the Constitution says. So districts have to have close to equal population with no more than a 5% deviation between the most and the least populous. Districts have to be contiguous and relatively compact. And as Beth said, our algorithm kind of builds those things in automatically. We also tried to minimize the number of counties split between districts, subject to that equal population constraint. And also based on some input from the commission, we set it up so that counties with population less than 10,000 would never be split between districts. So the smaller counties were automatically kept whole. And the commission also identified 4 specific geographically based communities of interest that they wanted us to keep together. So these 4 specific communities of interest were never split between districts in the plans that we created. And then as Beth described, so you need election data to overlay, and you have a choice of lots of elections. And what we did was we used a composite election that was determined by taking the average of election results over 8 statewide elections between 2016 and 2020. Basically, this was every statewide election over those 3 cycles, except for the 2020 presidential election, which both commissions decided was maybe something of an unusual election. So they left that one out of the index. And so what we're going to do in the following pictures is I'm going to show you the kind of histograms that Beth talked about. And I'm also going to show you how several of the final plans under consideration for each chamber compared. And the pictures I'm showing you are the pictures that we were asked to produce and that we showed the commission while they were doing their work and considering all these various plans. And just to keep the graphs manageable, there's going to be 2 sets because we were looking at 4 or 5 plans in each case, and it gets a little unmanageable on the graph. So for the Senate, we compared what turned out to be the final approved plan first to the 3rd staff plan, and then also to 2 additional proposed plans that were proposed by Commissioner Barnett, who was one of the Republican commissioners. And Carlos probably knows better than I do this process. It was, Barnett et al. So there were multiple commissioners that worked on several of these plans. And then for the House, oh, look, I have a double group one there. We'll compare the final approved plan to the 3rd staff plan for the House, and then also to 3 other proposed plans that were produced by some of the commissioners. So with that said, so this is the kind of histogram that Dr. Malmskog was showing you with orange pink plans. So what we looked at, so this is for the state Senate. There are 35 seats in the state Senate. And the question was, for this composite election, if you overlaid it on all of these districting plans, how many seats would you expect Democrats to win? And what we saw was that in our ensemble, the most common outcome was 20 or 21 seats out of those 35 for Democrats to win. And every single one of the proposed plans produced 22 seats. And I want to say something about this method. The ensemble method is not about finding exactly what the answer should be. So the fact that 21 and 22 were the most common outcomes in our ensemble, that doesn't mean that anything other than that is wrong. Anything that occurs relatively often in our ensemble is deemed reasonable. So we only flag plans for bias if they're way outside this bell curve. So this outcome of 22 seats definitely looks like it's within our reasonable range, and particularly in light of the fact that we've got 4 different plans here that were proposed by commissioners and other people on multiple ends of the political spectrum, and that they all came up with the same number. That's sort of additional confirmation, more than we would get from just looking at one single plan, that probably these plans are all producing a reasonable range of partisan outcomes. For a slightly more nuanced view, so if you're looking at, does a Democrat or a Republican win this seat, that's just a yes or no answer. But of course, we don't care so much about what happened in past elections. We're interested in predicting future elections. And elections are not all the same, right? So we talk about, safe Democratic and safe Republican seats versus competitive seats. So the vote percentage that we use here, like I said, come from this average over the 8 statewide elections. And just over the course of those eight elections, there was a swing from about 52.5% Democratic to 55% Democratic. So there was about a 3% swing just among those 8 elections over a 4-year range. So a typical district that reported Democratic vote share between 48.7 and 51.2 for this composite election probably had some Republican and some Democratic winners over the course of those 8. So we took a closer look at this by saying so the commission used this 8.5% range for what you considered competitive. We looked at this much narrower range and consider that sort of strongly competitive. Like those are the seats that really are toss-up seats. So with that in mind, we looked at this, and instead of just saying who wins, who loses, we looked at Democratic, Republican, and then toss-up, this middle category that we didn't consider strongly either one. Okay, and this is a little bit of a busy slide. So the blue is how many Democratic seats we saw, the red is how many Republican seats we saw, and the purple is how many toss-up seats we saw. And the fact that there's 2 rows is just because we divided these plans into 2 groups. So these sets of histograms are exactly the same. The only thing that's different is where these proposed plans fall. And what we see here is that in fact, all of these plans had about the typical number, or maybe even one less, of really truly Democratic seats. And that sort of extra Democrat results that we were seeing in the full thing was actually coming from the fact that these maps tended to have a larger number than usual toss-up seats and maybe a smaller than number of really safe Republican seats. So this just shows you a little bit more, in a little bit more detail of how that breakdown is happening. We also looked at the number of competitive districts as defined by this 8.5% vote band that the commission set. And what we saw was that actually all of these plans had slightly more competitive districts than what we saw in our ensemble. And we took this as a good sign because the amendment required the commission to try to maximize the number of competitive districts once they had satisfied all the other constitutional priorities. So the fact that the final approved plan had 2 more competitive districts than the most common outcome in our ensemble, that told us that, yeah, it looks like they probably did make some attempts to satisfy that constitutional priority. So that's the state Senate. Now we're going to move on to the state house. And this one is a little bit interesting. Here we see that all of the plans, including the ones drawn by commissioners on all sides of the partisan spectrum, actually had a lot more Democratic seats than what our ensemble predicted. If I just saw one plan here, I might say, that's an extreme outlier. There's something wrong with that plan. When I see all the plans that are under consideration out there, I start to second guess my ensemble construction methods. So understand that, like Beth said, these methods have only been in use for 5-7 years. They really are still very much under development, under construction. And this slide to me tells me that maybe I need to go back and take another look at my ensemble, among other things. And here it is broken down into that same Democratic Republican toss-up seats, where it doesn't look quite as extreme. Here I see maybe slightly more Democratic seats, and the final approved plan is the green line here. So in terms of Democratic seats that are out of that toss-up band, there's really only one more than what the ensemble predicted.
But what really happened was that there were many fewer safe Republican seats and many more toss-up seats. And just on that particular composite election, a lot of those toss-up seats ended up on the Democratic side. 1 or 2 percentage point difference, and they could have been on the Republican seat. So the fact that that map on the previous slide looked like it had way too many Democratic seats, quite a lot of those were just barely above 50%. So this map gives me a little more context to say that that maybe over a range of elections, over a range of partisan outcomes, that map is maybe not as extreme as it looked. For competitive district, we actually saw quite a range for the various House plans as to how many competitive districts that they contained. The final approved plan is this green line here. So it ended up with 16 competitive districts, whereas we saw 13 to 14 average in our ensemble. So again, we felt like the final approved plan looked pretty good by this measure. So, and of course, the question we were hired to ask is, do we see evidence of gerrymandering, partisan bias? And as I was mentioning, at first glance, it looks like maybe all of these House plans are suspect, but that doesn't seem right since there was a whole lot of different people creating these. If it were just one plan that looked like an outlier, I would worry about partisan bias. But when they're all looking like outliers, I'm going to ask, what could the flaw have been in our ensemble design? So here's a couple of explanations. One, I already touched on, that more of the majority Democratic than the majority Republican seats fall into this toss-up category. So that maybe makes it look a little more extreme than it was. The thing about computer generated plans, we all love to think that computers are magic and they can do everything, but they really can't. As Commissioner Perez mentioned, there was so much public input, many issues of local concern where people were sharing about their communities of interest and things, and we couldn't possibly model all that with our ensembles. And most significantly, we tried to design districts to minimize county splits. But since we were building our plans out of whole precincts, it turns out in Colorado, whole precincts don't mesh very nicely with cities and other municipalities. So in the short time that we had, we were not able to figure out a good way to have our algorithm try to minimize municipal splits as well as county splits. And that's a big deal, right? That, municipalities are significant communities of interest that the commission absolutely took into account, and our ensembles really did not. So this is actually our best guess for why the analysis looks a little bit off. It's not that the commission did anything wrong, it's that this was a significant priority that we were not able to build into our ensembles beyond these 4 specific communities of interest. So since we think there's a good explanation and it's our fault rather than the commission's fault why these things look different, we really feel that our analysis did not indicate any evidence of inappropriate bias with regard to any of the things we were asked to look at. It did raise for us some very interesting academic questions about how we might do better in the future at designing ensembles to more accurately reflect a larger variety of kinds of communities of interest and other priorities. So we have some interesting academic work to do on this question. And there's a really important moral here, and if you take away nothing else, take away this. Redistricting is fundamentally a human activity, and computers should never take the place of the human map drawers. Ensemble analysis can be a useful tool to provide some context as we work towards the goal of fair maps, and we need to keep working to make this tool even better. So how can you get involved? How can you help? There are some things that the commission had a hard time with, and a lot of these were data challenges and things that would make the process go more easily next time. The big thing is that we need better data and we need help to collect it. So, we've been talking to some of you folks from the league about, what we and future commissions would like to have and how we could help, various agencies at the state collect this and provide this. And so we appreciate the involvement of the league on this. The most important thing is high quality statewide precinct maps that actually reflect the actual precinct boundaries used by counties at the time of each election. You would think that this would be an easy ask, and it is not. it is shocking how hard it is to get accurate maps of precinct boundaries. And the reason we need this is because we do have election results by precinct, but if we're going to draw maps with district and try to overlay precinct results on each district, we need to know where that precinct is precisely. And so this is something that we need, and that is not nearly as available as you would imagine it would be. We also need precinct level reporting of all election results. We haven't really talked that much about the Voting Rights Act and protecting minority voting rights. Commissioner Perez mentioned this, and we were not the people who were tasked with evaluating this. But in order to evaluate whether or not you're satisfying the priorities of the Voting Rights Act and giving minorities ample opportunity to elect candidates of choice, you need as much local election data as you can get, because you need to look at, of course, we have a secret ballot, right? You can't know how any particular voter voted. So you need data as granular as you can get it to try to match voting data with what's the racial makeup of your region. And so if we could get the more precinct level election data you have, the better you can do with this. And one of the things that was really a challenge is that Colorado currently does a great job of reporting precinct level election results for statewide elections, but not so much for local elections and not so much for primary elections. And those are often actually the elections that tell you the most about racially polarized voting, particularly in cases where in a general election, the overall partisan preference of the minority might be very similar to the majority's preference, but maybe in the primary election, they preferred a different candidate. And in that case, you really need primary election results at the precinct level in order to be able to get a better idea of whether or not there is racially polarized voting, which is sort of the technical term for what you need to measure in order to know how you need to prioritize minority communities when drawing districts to satisfy the Voting Rights Act. So we would love your help in getting this data better for next time. And I think that's all we have to say. So thanks very much for letting us have so much of this conference today. We really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share our work with you. And I also just want to say on behalf of Beth and myself, it was really an honor and a privilege for us to get to work with the commissions and try to help them do the best job they possibly could for fair districts. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions, and whoever in your group would prefer to answer those. One question has to do with the rationale behind wanting to keep county and other boundaries intact. And then there was an additional question about why some Hispanic voters are unhappy with the outcome.
Oh, well, so it's a traditional districting priority to keep county and municipal boundaries intact. And I think it has to do with communities of interest. You like to think that if I've got an issue that's important to my city or my county, that I know I have a representative who's focused on that. Of course, it depends on, legislative districts are smaller than congressional districts. But, there's the classic packing and cracking thing, right? Where maybe you take a city and you chop it up in pieces and you put each piece in a district where that piece is only a small part of that district. And then that city ends up having no representatives who really represent the city, because everybody who represents a piece of the city also represents some other region. So I think the idea behind that is to make sure that these units, which are often considered cohesive communities of interest, have adequate representation.
Yeah, this is Carlos. Yes, and that was a good explanation. The Colorado Constitution requires that we keep political subdivisions whole. That's counties and cities. We have a requirement to keep those whole. We also have a requirement to seek out and understand communities of interest. And we also have criteria related to racial and ethnic minorities, particularly Latinos. And so we have that in our Constitution. But the question going back to why are we trying to keep our counties whole? We are required to do that unless there was a compelling reason to do the split. For example, maintenance of, for example, like the Voting Rights Act is one example where we could actually split a city or county. Or if there's a very strong, compelling evidence for a community of interest. That was another reason to do that. But by and large, we are required to keep cities and counties whole. And that's, again, the Constitution requires that.
Do you think that different voting methods like proportional voting, for example, would make your job easier?
Good Lord, yes. I mean, this is a really interesting question, and I appreciate Neil bringing it up. So I am actually on the voting methods team for the Boulder County League, along with Neil and some of the other folks who are here today. And absolutely. So one of the things that you learn when you start studying this for a while is that if you want proportional representation, which is one of the many things that people often say they want from fair districts, single member districts are a terrible way to achieve it, as you know, the Massachusetts example shows really dramatically. Multi-member districts with a proportional representation voting system would be a much better way to get it. It's harder to gerrymander effectively, partly just because you have larger districts, so you have fewer of them. But the other thing is that the proportional voting method really does make the boundaries matter less. I actually have a student who did a senior thesis on this this past year, where she looked at the Colorado State Senate and compared what an ensemble of single member districts, what kind of outcomes you got, versus an ensemble of 5-member districts with a proportional voting system, you know, sort of a toy model of a proportional voting system, what you might get. And she found evidence that, yes, you really would get more proportional outcomes, and that histogram gets tighter, which is the evidence that it's harder to gerrymander. That you don't have such a wide range of outcomes depending on how the districts are drawn.
Did you find that some counties were better than others at reporting precinct level election results? Because that might be helpful to the league in knowing that, if we can be of service in gathering some of that information.
Maybe I could answer that. No, the Secretary of State does collect all the precinct level data for all 64 counties in Colorado. So we didn't have any problems there, but I can tell you where it's kind of difficult is we go back to the shape files. Not only would you have to have the precincts, we got to know where they are. Dr. Cleland mentioned that, said that before. I just want to reiterate that. Helping some of these low population counties that may not have what I consider robust GIS capabilities is something that we definitely need help with across the state, especially on these some of these low population counties that don't have, like I said, robust GIS capabilities for reporting. Sometimes you'll see precincts come out like in paper maps or images, and you know they're practically hand drawn sometimes. But with that said, they have modernized a lot of things. But that's something, yeah. Just make sure our low population counties that don't have a lot of resources have the resources they need to produce this in electronic format, so we could then use standard off-the-shelf tools, GIS tools, and analytical tools to be able to understand what we have.
All right, and a final question that's come up from several participants is communities of color seem to be dissatisfied, not just Latinx, but others as well. And is their concern and their dissatisfaction, is that justifiable, or is this just kind of the way the system works and we need to work harder at
so I can say one thing is, you know, one of the big problems with single member districts is that you're always going to have people who feel they aren't represented, right? You know, Republican voters in Boulder are never going to feel represented. Democratic voters in, you know, Colorado Springs are rarely going to feel represented. And these priorities in drawing districts conflict with each other. So on the congressional district side, you could have gotten better, you know, you could have gotten one district with much larger minority representation if you had been willing to split Denver. But Denver has traditionally been kept whole within a congressional district. So you have competing priorities. Do you want to keep Denver whole, or do you want to split it in order to create better minority representation? And I'm not going to second guess why the Congressional Commission decided what they did, but they had competing priorities and they had to make a choice. And that's not the only place where that choice was operative, but just, you know, every line you draw is a choice, and communities of interest overlap. They're not always well defined geographically. As we saw from Massachusetts, if you have a community of interest that's too spread out geographically, it might be physically impossible to draw a district that gives it representation. You know, and I think all of these, you know, sort of add to the argument that single member districts are terrible. But they're what we have for now.
Yeah, but to just elaborate on that, I can tell you, it may not have seemed this way if you guys were monitoring the commission proceedings, especially when we had to go into executive session to discuss the Voting Rights Act. Let me tell you, now that it's done, we took this very seriously. In fact, the reason we had to consult with our attorneys because it's an important legal question. So our silence should not have been construed as that we were being ambivalent or being indifferent to the needs of minorities. In fact, it was precisely the reason we wanted to make sure we had kind of a motto, leave no voter left behind, and it includes underserved communities and communities of color. And now, as for the dissatisfaction there, I do know that on the Latino community on the legislative maps, there was a high level of satisfaction for the legislative maps. The congressional side, I can't speak for the congressional side, but the reality is we had to create a congressional district of, you know, 750,000 people, almost 744,000 people. That's a lot of people. And so it's inevitable when you get into these single member districts that we were talking about, what I call the 50% plus one, that's how you win elections, right? So if your minority community is 49%, you know, you're not going to win in a 50% plus one. And so are there innovations we can do to address that? That's a good question. I think it's beyond the scope of what we were trying to do, at least on the legislative side and even on the congressional side. But certainly I took very seriously valid criticisms. No voter should feel like they're being left out of the system. I can tell you that. And that was one of the reasons I applied to the commission, was to make sure that we had all voters being represented and that they are actually heard and they are represented at the state level.
I'd like to add one thing about, you know, the idea of majority-minority districts. It's not always the case that a minority population needs to have a majority in order to be an effective district for their candidate of choice. It depends on how the rest of the population of that district votes. And that's exactly why having the tools to measure racially polarized voting is so important. It may be that in some areas of the state, a minority community really does need close to 50% because they vote very differently from the majority community, whereas there might be other areas of the state where the minority community votes very similarly to the majority community. And that's why we really need that precinct level data to do this racially polarized voting analysis, because without that, we just don't know where the threshold is for, and it won't be the same for every district. What percentage of a minority community you need in order to create an effective district for that community.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation today. I think you have really clarified lots of things for most, all of us that are in attendance today. And most importantly, I'd like to thank the three of you for your service, because I know that you invested a tremendous amount of time, and your dedication to being engaged and to doing the very best job that you could do in order to come up with fair districts moving forward is to be applauded. So thank you so much.
And thank you.
The next item on our agenda today is a presentation by a group of individuals who has been working since last year on creating an election security position for the state of Colorado. Maud Norrell, who has kind of served as the chair of this committee, and has been a league state action member in Nevada, Oregon, as well as Colorado. Gaithia Weiss, who's a member of the Boulder League Voting Methods team, and also on the state's Legislative Action Committee. And Neil McBurnett, who is a LWV Boulder member, a computer scientist and an election integrity consultant who has been instrumental in adopting risk limiting audits, as well as Tony Larson and myself have served on this committee to come up with an election security position. And they're going to talk with you about just kind of give you a brief overview of this, and then strongly encourage you to participate in the consensus meeting that we have scheduled for January the 22nd. So Maud,
can everyone see our screen?
Yes.
See my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Except that now I can't. Okay. Sorry. Technology works except when it doesn't. Can you still see if
we can't
yes.
see your screen now.
Okay. Okay. And Karen, I was distracted. Did you talk about Oregon?
No, I did not.
Okay, so the League of Women Voters of Oregon adopted a position, a three or four part position, which included election security, personal information protection, and information security. They wanted national consensus. We gathered our little group, including Karen and Tony, to say, do we like, what do you think we think of Oregon's position? And came to the conclusion that it was a good start, but we wanted some revisions and we wanted it to go further in the area of election, especially in the area of election security.
Maud, let me stop you just a second. Oops. Are you trying to share your screen? We can see you, but we cannot see your slides.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Technology is what. Can you see the slides now?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And Oregon said, oh, it took 3 years of all sorts of process to be able to develop this position. We really can't. We don't have another 3 years to do a revision. So we are standing on Oregon's shoulders. And we've talked to actually 3 members of their team who are delighted that we are carrying the ball forward. The other thing that brought us here to developing a draft election security position and asking for a consensus meeting was a bill last session, and Gaithia is going to mention this bill at a quick trot.
Okay, so some of you that are on the Legislative Action Committee have already gotten a presentation last year from Angela Wilkins on how important this was for our group, the lobbying effort that we had. Originally, a bill was introduced that would have allowed all disabled voters in Colorado to return their ballot over the internet. We raised concerns about what a serious cybersecurity issue that could pose. And the bill was ultimately amended to carefully limit that to only those who really could not use a paper ballot, and the blind and other people with other physical disabilities. And that's crucial because, as we remember, the mission of the League has 2 components, and their balance need to be there and sometimes conflicting. We need to empower voters, and we need to protect democracy. And so one of the things that we are looking at with the cybersecurity position, we have such a strong election system in Colorado with our paper ballots, our risk limiting audits, our mail-in system. We want to protect that, and looking more nationally, we want to be able to promote these secure systems with voters in other states at web.
Right, and we had just a sliver of a position to stand on last session, and so we really would like a robust position. And of course, election security is an issue nationally, and we would like to take this to the national meeting in June. And to do that, we have to get our adopted position to national by March 1st. So the team read, Gaithia read way more than the rest of us. Anybody who's looked at our study document, that is, Gaithia found most of that and read most of that. and studied and wrote and edited. I didn't put down here argued. There were a few differences of opinion, which was good. And it was wonderful, of course, having Neil as our in-house team member, election integrity expert. So as Karen said, this next Saturday, we are having a statewide consensus meeting. Please read our documents beforehand. There'll be an email, I think, going out again today. And there will be more informational meetings this coming week. Local consensus meetings are optional. So voter registration databases, Katia, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think that we all can understand this, and a lot of us have experience going back in history with old-fashioned poll books that were paper, and the size of precincts was basically dictated by the number of people that you could have in a poll book and expect the election officials to thumb through to find the voters as they came in to vote. Modern databases, we need to have a lot of advantages, huge advantages, same day voting, easier verification and changes of voters as people move or unfortunately pass away and things. But there are security risks. And so one of the things we are looking at in this position statement is to come up with a strong position that the league can stand behind and lobby for the best possible database handling systems.
Let me just quickly interrupt. There are several people that would like for you to, and maybe Neil, you could explain this because I'm not sure how to tell Maud how to do this. Viewers would like to have you limit the screen to the single slide. There you go.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know how to advance the slides now. Oh.
There you go.
Okay, but I don't know how to go back. So
we'll go forward. That's the problem.
We'll go forward.
You can just use your arrow keys, I believe, to go back and forth.
I'm in Google Slides rather than PowerPoint.
I think it's still this.
So contingency plans, natural disasters, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with recently. Fires and floods and mudslides and blizzards and power outages and internet outages. All of these can affect anything, but including election systems. And then specific to election systems, poll books can fail, electronic poll books can fail, voting equipment, voter reg, reporting systems, and county election officials at the state and county level need to have contingency plans for these. Properly handled, our modern systems can help mitigate these, offer a little better flexibility, but of course, if the power goes out, they're vulnerable. What do these 4 federal agencies have in common? They all warned states that returning ballots over the internet is really risky and really vulnerable. And to consider it only for voters with no other way to vote. And as Gathia mentioned, there are some voters that cannot handle a paper ballot privately, independently, and which is the carve out that we negotiated SB 128 down to. Another category of voters who needs extra help is, and special consideration, are the uniformed and overseas citizen absentee voters. By the Federal MOVE Act, for any federal election, they have to be mailed absentee ballots, or they can get blank ballots delivered electronically. The federal law does not require that those votes can return their ballots over the internet, which is the most unsafe, would be a most unsafe thing for them to do, insecure. So for the very few people who cannot use voter verifiable paper ballots, who cannot even receive a blank ballot and mail it back, his example is someone on submarine for 6 months, that E2E VIV voting is more secure than what most places use now, but really paper ballots protect better against large scale attacks. Athea?
So you're going to the next slide then?
Yeah. The E2E VIV, well, it's not,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've just sort of run through that. I don't want to overemphasize E2E VIV. I just want to say that what we are basically emphasizing is that taking the position of the bulk, a vast majority of cybersecurity experts who have that paper ballots are for the foreseeable future the way to have secure, auditable elections. But we'll use the best possible process when that can't be done in these very limited instances. And we mentioned the UOCAVA, the military and overseas voters, just in the most recent National Defense Appropriation Act. The original act contained information to expand internet voting, and cybersecurity experts got that removed from that legislation, pointing out that not only was that a risk to the elections, but posed security risks to military computers overall, with a motivation to insert malware. So I can, you want me to just go jump right in here, see if we can keep moving along. So I think the big thing that's kind of hard for us to comprehend, because we're all used to using credit cards, we all have bank accounts, most of us transfer money online and aren't too worried that it gets lost in the process. So why is it that voting is different than banking? And the reality is that banking and financial systems do fail a lot. There's a lot of credit card fraud. There's a lot of identity theft. There are data breaches. And in general, what happens is that the large corporate entities handle this. Sometimes they absorb the costs. There's possibilities for going for criminal charges and getting restitution ultimately. Voting is different because in the first place, the ballot itself is secret. When you make a financial transaction, you know who you are and how much money you have. The person you're sending it to knows who you are and how much money you have. And if it gets lost in the transition, that can be traced and ultimately, hopefully, fixed, or else somebody has to absorb the cost. But voting is not quite as traceable back to the original. You can't, at the end, know exactly where your ballot went, and you can't undo an election. And so we have the more people who are voting internet in an basically insecure, might not make a difference if there's no motivation to attack it. But if you have a large number of voters participating that way, you do have a big motivation for hacking.
Thank you.
Very, very, very quickly, a question: how have the blind and other disabled been able to vote up to now? Just a brief explanation on that might be helpful.
I believe that there have been equipment at polling places, and generally that has to be done with assistance from another person. I'm not familiar with that detail. When they vote online, modern computing systems used by the blind interpret what is on what for us would be a visual screen into information that they can hear or read. And so that is something they are very comfortable with, and a process that they can do entirely on their own. And it's that sense of voting independently that empowers voters to have a true right to vote. And again, their ballot would not necessarily be secure in an internet situation, but if there's just a few people doing it, there's probably no reason to attack. Their computer, their personal computer could be attacked, the transition could be attacked, the receiving computer systems could be attacked, but the motivation comes from, would it really affect an election outcome? And that's what we're trying to limit it. That's the purpose of the limitation.
I'll just note that since about 2004, the Help America Vote Act has mandated accessible voting systems for blind voters and others in polling places. And actually in Oregon, they will, if you can't get to a polling place, they will bring one of those systems out to your home so that you can vote, again, privately and independently at home. So both of those are important. It's especially hard in COVID or something like that, but that's what we're trying to address.
And I think, and Sharon Pettiford had a question. She said mobile voting would correct a lot of the security concerns. I think that's what she was referring to.
So this is Porco. Yeah, that, but this is not Porcodam because this is the
I'm sorry, I can't hear. So maybe something else in the chat. And then has the disabled community expressed a request for this?
Well, that's what SB 188 was all about. That was a bill promoted by
a shitload of these
the disability community, and that is how it got into the National Defense Authorization Act.
That's where we were worried about you getting.
I'm hearing somebody else, and maybe if they could mute themselves, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm not sure, but just a wild guess, the word mobile might imply cell phone based systems, and those also have serious cybersecurity risks.
No, no, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Mobile voting, I'm talking, and that is a great point too. What I'm saying is the mobile, especially in highly marginalized communities and disabled communities, mobile voting would be like literally mobile voting, like these mobile stations that the I can't think, election boards would provide to these people. In some instances, like in Kansas City and other big places, they do provide those should the people need those, because to cut down on the security risks that you talk about. And we have found that the security risks have been reduced significantly while providing voter access and providing people to exercise their civic right. That's what I'm stating.
Right. No, that's good.
And that sounds like a polling place that's in a vehicle.
Right. I think that's
okay.
Absolutely. They roll up to the porch, actually.
Okay.
They call it porch voting, but I think it's at the curb or whatever, so that the disabled person would be able to have access to that.
Able to access. Okay.
Thank you.
Super,
Sorry
thanks.
not to interrupt, but that's what I'm meaning. I wanted to be
right. And certainly
thanks.
The objective of the League of Women Voters, again, is to create that balance where we are empowering voters and we are protecting democracy. No, that's the thrust.
Yeah, and sometimes the tug. So on transparency, we say, yes, we think the public should be able to observe the election process, access copies of source code, samples of election equipment, copies or images of ballots with any personally identifying information removed, of course, copies of elections procedures, all without interfering in an ongoing election process. There are some things we think should have strictly controlled access, like passwords, original ballots, actual equipment used, and the actual software that's used. And then we also talk about the chain of custody from the time a voter drops their ballot into a drop box to the time the ballot is recorded. That needs to be documented. It's important it needs to be documented, and that procedure needs to be well followed. Next steps are, next steps. So the consensus meeting is next Saturday. We will take that consensus input, the team, and edit the draft position. Then there will be a special membership meeting to approve the edited draft using consensus input. And if that's approved, we will then go forth and ask other states. We'll go to national and ask others, again, ask other states to support. Please do finish reading the documents if you haven't had a chance to. Email us with questions. Be ready for discussion and voting on those consensus questions. They are all in the document folder that I think there's another email going out tonight, today, with a link to the document folder. And there will be a number of meetings next week, including a statewide meeting, informational meeting that will go into this in greater depth. And those will be in the email today as well. Thank you, Beth, for doing that. So do we have other questions?
Okay, I think basically the questions are ones that you have already answered, Maude. I would like to really commend the committee for their hard work. They spent many, many hours doing research, having very spirited discussions about what needed to be included. I would like to reinforce again what Maude has said, that they have come up with a draft position. We are very hopeful that we get good participation at the January 22nd, 10 o'clock Saturday morning consensus meeting so that we can get input from membership. We have fast-tracked this because we want to be sure that with a very important election coming up this fall, that the league has not only Colorado, but LWVUS has a very strong election security position that members can refer back to. So there have been multiple emails that have been sent out. As Maude told you, a follow-up email will be sent with all of the documents with the link. There will be some additional informational meetings that will be held throughout the state this upcoming week. I know we're doing one for Weld County, one for Arapahoe, and I think we have another general membership presentation planned as well. So again, Beth will be sending that out, be watching your email. You can see on the screen right now contact information for 4 of us that served on the committee. Feel free to email or call any of us if you have additional questions. And we certainly look forward to seeing you next Saturday.
And the responses to questions will be in the consensus meeting to answer Jane. And drop boxes in rural areas, that is not that's an access question rather than an election security question. So that is outside the scope of our outside the scope of our position.
All right.
So thank you everybody for asking good questions.
and thank you, Maude. I'm now going to introduce Carly Salon, who is a licensed clinical social worker and licensed addiction counselor, who is the STAR operations manager with Denver 911. As some of you may be aware, the STAR program deploys emergency response teams that include emergency medical technicians and behavioral health clinicians, not police officers, to engage individuals who are experiencing crises related to mental health issues, poverty, homelessness, and substance abuse. The STAR emergency response teams responded to 2,300 calls for service that would have otherwise been dispatched to the police. And not once, they are happy to report, did the teams need to call for police backup. The program is expanding due to its great success. We're excited to learn more and maybe find out how we can bring this community to other community, this program to other communities. So Carly, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you guys for the opportunity to talk to you about the STAR program that we have here in Denver. Yeah, I appreciate it. There we go. So I'll give you a brief overview. Here in Denver, we have seen mental health related calls into 911 or police non-emergency rise year after year. And we really wanted to strive to send the right response when an individual in our community calls non-emergency or 911 because of a crisis or a poverty related issue or has a resource request. We've traditionally had 3 models, historically out of 911 communications for response. And, those are ambulance, fire, or police, and really looking at creating a menu of options for folks here in Denver. So we look to the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon, who's been running a similar model for over 30 years, very successfully. We went out on a site visit in May of 2019. Myself, a representative from 911 Communications, the representative from the Chief of Police's office, community advocates and providers, Denver Justice Project, Dasher, Harm Reduction Action Center, and we went out and sort of saw how Eugene was doing this firsthand, and then came back to Denver and started working on how we could apply this model here. So we do pair a mental health clinician and a paramedic or an EMT that responds to low risk, low acuity calls coming into the 911 system. I think for some historical context, it's important to note that we have had a co-responder program running here in Denver since January of 2016. That pairs a licensed mental health clinician with the Denver police officer. Then they respond to calls coming in that have a behavioral health nexus that might have a higher risk component. That officer is needed for scene safety. So we had been running that program for several years. And sort of recognize that our co-responder teams were responding to calls where that officer really wasn't needed for a scene safety component, those lower level, low risk calls. And STAR was sort of born as a 2.0 version of our co-responder program to take those lower level calls that have historically wound up on the plate of police, off of their plate and be able to reroute that to a more appropriate team. So we came back from Eugene, and those same individuals formed a work group and started, as I said before, looking at how we would, deploy a team like this in Denver. And initially there were a lot of conversations around, well, how are we going to determine that these calls are appropriate for a civilian team? We don't want to send a non-emergent civilian response to a medical emergency or a situation that may be unsafe. So there were lots of conversations that happened around the calls that we were going to take and how they were going to be determined as STAR eligible. So we started with this set of nature codes, and nature code, is a term for a way that a call is coded when it comes into 911 communications. So we looked at this set of nature codes. Assist is a nature code that sort of indicates, that someone is in need of a resource or something that's not necessarily law enforcement centric. Best example I could give is, we had an individual who had taken the bus from Philadelphia to Denver and had ran out of money and was sort of stranded here and didn't know what their next steps were going to be or where they were going to stay that night. And that was coded as an assist call. So we're responding to, welfare checks where there's not a risk component or any sort of threat. Indecent exposure, which, is typically an unhoused individual in our downtown area changing clothes in an alley or something like that. And what we're aiming to do is we're trying to provide folks with the connection to ongoing supports and resources so that they're not popping up on the 911 system in the future. So, you know, for instance, we got a call about indecent exposure, and it was an unhoused woman trying to change clothes privately in an alley, and someone saw her and she just sort of explained that, you know, she didn't have anywhere private to change. So we were able to connect her to the Gathering Place here in Denver, which is a women's day shelter that provides showers, laundry, lunch. Individuals can receive their mail there. So we were able to connect her to that resource so that hopefully she was able to access that in the future, and folks weren't calling in 911 or police non-emergency on her. So looking at how STAR sort of makes it to calls. So our 911 call takers, our civilian call takers and dispatchers are all trained on the resource and are trained to screen calls for STAR eligibility. So when you call into 911, you're typically asked, you know, what's the location of your emergency? Is there a weapon? Is anyone injured? Is there a time issue? Do we need to send a lights and sirens emergent response? And is there a suspect? Has a crime been committed? And if all of those answers are no, then our call takers can start thinking about STAR. And is this, you know, something that STAR could maybe handle more appropriately than an officer? So that happens about 41% of the time that we're directly dispatched to calls that have come in to 911 communication. 34% of our calls are actually officers showing up on scene first, recognizing that they aren't the right response for the situation that they're coming across, and asking on the radio for STAR to come and take over that call. And then we do a good bit of self-initiated work in the field. So as far as I'm concerned, the best 911 call is the one that doesn't happen. So we, you know, if we notice someone having a big behavior outside of Starbucks or someone sitting on a curb crying or something like that, we will make contact with that individual to see if we can, you know, support them in any way. So here's some of our data. As it was previously mentioned, we've run about we've run 2,294 calls since rolling out the pilot in our downtown area June 1st of 2020. And we have never had to call for police backup due to a safety issue on any of those calls. So we're very proud of that statistic. The blue graph you can see is our incidents by problem type. So our top 3 most common calls are welfare check, trespass, unwanted party, and that assist category that I mentioned before. So those are the calls we're most commonly responding to. The kind of colorful graph there shows the overall citywide STAR volume by hour of day and day of week. So typically folks think that the highest call volume time may be overnight or weekends, but it's actually Monday through Friday during business hours. These are when, you know, business owners are trying to open their place of work and someone, you know, is maybe sleeping in the doorway and they're calling. So we are trying to put our first wave of expansion resources in that sort of time period to make sure that we are meeting the highest need of the community. And then we can add additional resources beyond that. We'll go back and look at the data, see what we're, you know, making it to, what we still need to make it to, and sort of go from there. So this slide just talks a little bit about those traditional response pathways that I mentioned earlier. And how Denver is sort of striving to create an additional pathway that provides connection to support and behavioral health resources and other community resources. So moving from the pilot to citywide expansion. So we ran our pilot program for 1 year in Police District 6, downtown Denver, which is an area of high call volume for us, and we ran the pilot Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. We were able to gather really great data to inform a citywide expansion. We were able to get a very clear picture of what the boots on the ground work looked like, and we're currently expanding citywide. So we're hiring staff, working our way up to 9 teams and 6 vans that will be responding 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is our highest call volume time, as I mentioned. And those vans will be able to go where they're needed. They're not tied to a geographic area. This is a heat map sort of Denver. And you can see these are our, the dark purple areas are our highest call volume areas. So we want to make sure that we're expanding in an equitable way, in a way that allows individuals in our community who need a STAR response to get a STAR response. So we're looking at sort of a dynamic dispatch approach where the vans will stage in areas where they can access multiple areas of the city, and they will be able to go where they're needed. So if we need multiple vans in the East Colfax area or downtown, or along South Federal, we can get those units there and make sure that we are responding appropriately. Okay, we'll get to.
Well, we have several questions.
Yeah.
Carly, first of all, do you think that this program has resulted in greater trust on the part of the community in police? As a result?
So, you know, anecdotally, I think it has. I think it is good for community members to see if an officer shows up first and maybe doesn't have the appropriate set of skills or appropriate resources to solve that problem, that officer requested someone who could provide a solution. We have also just contracted for a pretty robust third-party evaluation with Urban Institute that's going to be doing a very in-depth cost savings analysis, and also looking at some more qualitative aspects like, you know, has this improved community policing or the community's view of policing? So more to come on that.
Well, that kind of leads to the next question of, have you approached officials about the possibility, Denver officials about the possibility of maybe providing some funding so that this could be expanded?
So they already have. We ran the pilot program, which was actually, the funding was drawn down by Denver Police Department from the Caring for Denver Foundation. The expansion contract has moved out of public safety and is now with the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. But the mayor set aside $1.3 million out of the general fund to expand STAR, and then City Council approved a $1 million supplemental, and Caring for Denver Foundation was generous enough to match the original $1.3 million investment. So there has been a significant investment from both the city and the Caring for Denver Foundation to expand the program.
Great. Can you give us an example of how a situation involving someone who is suicidal, how that is handled by the STAR team only?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have actually a great sort of success story that comes to mind. So early on in the pilot, we were called to student housing building to do a welfare check on an individual. And we were able to make contact with that individual. And I was able to chat with them and assess for safety and talk to them a bit. And it was pretty clear that they were dealing with pretty significant depression. And I, you know, for kind of confidentiality reasons, I won't go in depth about the assessment, but I was concerned enough for this individual that I felt that they needed to be transported to the hospital on a mental health hold for further evaluation. I was concerned about their safety. And, you know, the medic and I were kind of talking, and, you know, we had the option to call an ambulance to do that transport. but that would have potentially been traumatizing and detrimental to that individual, especially living in a student housing building. And it was pretty close to the beginning of the semester. And, you know, to have an ambulance crew come and take this individual out on a gurney, we were just kind of talking about how that, you know, might negatively impact them going forward and be a negative experience. So we were actually able to work with this individual to agree that, you know, yes, their safety was a concern. And that, you know, they probably needed to go to the hospital for further support and assistance. And we were actually able to walk out with that individual and transport them on the Star van to the hospital. So I think that's an example, one, of how, you know, police would have typically been dispatched to that welfare check. And instead, you know, a clinician and a medic were able to go and game plan to do that transport to get that individual the support that they needed in sort of a least restrictive, trauma-informed way.
Oh, great. So do you have to purchase all of your own equipment and vehicles? You had mentioned grants and some support by the Denver mayor. Does that cover your costs?
Yes. So our costs, our contracts managed by Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, and then they use those city funds and Caring for Denver funds to, you know, operate the program. I will say, so the clinicians are employees of Mental Health Center of Denver who contract with the city to provide the clinical services. And then our medical staff, our medics and EMTs, are Denver Health employees that contract with the city to provide the services. And we do actually get a pretty significant offset from being able to bill Medicaid and insurance for the services provided on the Star van. But no one ever sees a bill for a Star interaction. You know, if we can bill insurance and it's appropriate to do so, we will, and the funding covers, you know, anything that's not billable.
Okay, that's great. So what would you say is the average wait time when a call comes in?
It really varies on how busy we are and how long we're spending on calls that day. You know, STAR is a non-emergent response. So we're not looking, you know, we're not running lights and sirens. We're looking more at our ability to spend the time that we need to on scene to be able to solve the problem. You know, typically officers, ambulance, staff, medics, EMTs, you know, they have a lot of calls waiting. They are trying to get there, solve a problem quickly, and get to the next call, right? STAR has the luxury of time. So if I have to sit with someone for an hour to support them and solve the problem, you know, in the long term, then that's what we're willing to do. So our response time, you know, is very much dependent on what situations we are coming across that day and how busy we are.
And what would you say is the feasibility of smaller communities to be able to implement a program like this?
I mean, you know, I think every community, just like we did with Cahoots, will have to look at, you know, the model and then figure out how it needs to be tweaked to fit the needs of their community. I think the first individuals you would need to partner with would be your local police department and 911 communication center, you know, and individuals in your community with lived experience to be able to sort of inform logistically and operationally how this could happen in your community, and also what vulnerable members of our community would like to see in a program like this. So I think, you know, it's possible in all communities, and each community will have unique challenges that they'll have to solve for.
All right. Couple of things before we let you go.
Sure.
Is there a specific number when, you know, if participants find themselves in a situation where they or somebody they know needs this kind of assistance as opposed to police intervention? Can you post the specific number that they might call if they live in the Denver area? And then secondly, if you would not mind providing your contact information so that some of us that live in other outlying communities might reach out to you directly.
Absolutely. So I will just quickly say that you can access STAR by calling 911 police non-emergency, or we do have a STAR line. They are all answered by our civilian call takers in the 911 communication center. But even if we didn't want to put the responsibility on the caller to have to know what STAR is or have to figure that out. So all of our call takers are trained to send a STAR response if appropriate, whether someone asks for STAR or not. So, just know that that we'll take care of it on our end as well. And I'd be happy to put my contact information in the chat, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if anyone has additional questions or would like to talk more about the program.
Okay, one last question.
Sure.
Just one more. Is this program focused and a priority in the red-lined area where it is needed the most?
So we ran our pilot program in our downtown area, which is our highest call volume area. So we tried to send a resource, where it was needed most. Also recognizing that our pilot program was not meeting the needs of the entire city. So that's part of the reason why with the expansion, we're looking at a dynamic dispatch approach so that we can get units to folks who need it. There are several areas of our city, that are underserved and need these resources, and we want to make sure that we can get them to those individuals.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Carly. This is a wonderful presentation that really provides hope that when people in local communities see that there's a need, that we can actually address problems and find solutions. So kudos to the group. Carly's contact information will be in the chat, so please make a copy of that. At this time, we're going to take a little bit of a break. So I would like to ask that all of you please be back by 12:15. We are going to start on the dot at 12:15. Take a break and we'll see you shortly. We are starting again promptly at 12:15. I think there has been a question about who can see the transcript. Beth, I believe, will provide a link to that if you'd like to go back at a later date or would like to share with other folks that you think might be interested who were able to attend today. We'll provide the link so that you can go back and get additional information on today's meeting. We're going to open this afternoon with a report on upcoming legislative session and priorities, and that discussion will be led by Tony Larson, who, as you all are aware, is our LWVCO Director of Action and Advocacy, and Andrea Wilkins, who is our legislative liaison. As you are aware, I suppose, I would hope, the legislative session began last week, and they're going to kind of fill you in on what's taking shape and how the league's priorities fit in at this point. So, Tony, do I turn it over to you or to
yes.
Andrea?
Yeah, I'm gonna start it off.
Okay, take it away.
So, as Karen said, I am responsible for action and advocacy, which means I have to pay attention to the legislature and other things as well. So over the interim between the two sessions of the legislature, we have been working on or trying to identify some legislation that we might introduce as the league. We are trying to become more proactive and in our advocacy and lobbying process. So we identified the redistricting process and cybersecurity, 17-year-old voting in primaries, postage paid ballot return envelopes. And we've already discussed, obviously, redistricting, and that was a very in-depth, very good presentation. And the cybersecurity, which you will hear more about this week and next Saturday. So what is happening with some other of the items, plus some others that are always on the agenda? Local leagues and all members can be involved in identifying the need for legislation. And we're really trying to open this up and get more input from the local leagues. So either watching the Legislative Action Committee by Zoom to find out what's going on and have the discussions on the pieces of legislation. And I just this morning looked, and I think there's like 115 pieces of legislation that have been introduced. So there's plenty to look at. A lot of tax issues. So, and it would be reduction of taxes. So we will be paying attention to that for sure. Anyone who finds a provision or lack of a provision that isn't working, our staff lobbyist and me at the moment would like to know. If the issue falls within the league framework of work, we will take it and look at it and perhaps work on it. We've developed some relationships closer relationships or relationships that we haven't had before. So it's a really good way to get our name out there and to work with others and to develop networks and coalitions. We have already had a discussion, as I said, and I'm going to turn this down to moving down to 17-year-old voting. Amendment 76, which we passed a couple of years ago, citizen qualifications of elected, changed the language of the Constitution from every citizen to only a citizen. For some reason, and you have to go to some of the work that's been done by the legislative legal services about the details, the legal details, but this language affects the 17-year-old provision that allowed 17-year-olds to vote in primaries if they were going to be 18 by the time the general election came along. So the league, always attempting to keep the voting process as open as possible, has taken steps to see if we can't rectify that problem. So we've talked to the Secretary of State's office and to organizations likely to be interested in this provision, such as New Era, American Votes. We've also talked to Senator Fenberg, who is interested in this particular piece, but while many of these organizations and Senator Fenberg are showing interest in this and they'd like to do something about it, in general, organizations are not feeling that this is a good year to do that. So we are gathering information as much as we can and putting together, documents that lead our case. And that's where we are right now with the 17-year-old vote, unfortunately. As you know, if we were to try to get this on the ballot through the legislature, it takes 2/3 of both houses. If we were to do an initiative campaign, that's a lot of work. And without a lot of people behind us and working with us, it's just not a good time to do it. The other issue, which we have had on our back burner, which we would like to move to the front, but again, we haven't gotten a lot of traction, is that to generate interest in adopting a postage paid ballot return provision. We have made little headway with this, but to let you know that we really are interested in this, and we hope to be able to sometime in the not too distant future get this introduced into the legislature. Representative Sullivan, he's interested in this, and he has some connection with the post office. So he's well informed, and he would like to see this go forward as well. But this is not a time for him. As you probably know, there are limits on how many pieces of legislation legislators can introduce, and it's 5. They've already done some of those, and they have a couple more left to do. Now, yes, you're going to say, I know legislators who introduce a lot more than that. Yes, that happens. And they'll sort of, ignore the rules a little bit because of something special that needs to be done. The budget is going to be a very fascinating discussion this year. There's an infusion of about $3.2 billion more than last year. So legislators are looking at the fact that they have a lot more money to spend. However, there will be a lot more contentious or competitive processes going on, work going on, probably a lot behind the scenes to get their pet project funded. Much of the discussion so far, and when I was looking at the legislation this morning that's been introduced, there are maybe 15, maybe more tax reform pieces of legislation. Many of them, most of them would reduce the taxes in one way or another. And of course, we always look at that and we say, yes, reducing taxes is probably an okay thing to do, but there are 2 points is that, will we have enough money to run government and to get to the programs that we're interested in funding? And will this affect the future of the budget process? If it's a permanent tax reduction, it could create problems in the future. Some of the items that they're looking at is the reduction in the income tax and the sales tax, the K-12 budget stabilization factor, everyone's favorite, the homestead exemption, repayment of the unemployment trust fund, and the para debt. Governor Polis would like the legislature to focus on one-time expenditures of payment, and that will not move to other years. So the League will continue to work on many topics we usually address: education, housing, healthcare, and climate among them. But I will let others talk about these issues, and I will turn this over to Andrea, our staff lobbyist. Andrea?
Thanks, Tony. I noticed there were a couple of questions in the chat about some of the efforts that Tony had referenced around the prepaid posts on ballots. There was a question about whether or not other states cover that. I don't have the exact figures in front of me right now, but I believe it's around 1/3 of the states that actually do that. So certainly something that we would like to see Colorado do. I think there is interest in it. I think it's just that it just didn't rise to the top of the priority list. So, we're going to keep our communication open with Representative Sullivan around this issue, who is a retired Postal Service worker and, as Tony mentioned, is very interested. So we'll continue to try and work with him on this issue. And then before I move on to some of the forthcoming legislation, I know there was also a question about the 17-year-old voting rights and why this isn't a good time. And, there's a lot of factors that go into trying to figure out the strategy and the timing around this. And of course, the stakeholder coalition is an extremely important component of that, as Tony referenced. The other piece of it that is critical for us is having Republican support, either somebody coming on as a sponsor, or just making sure that we have enough Republican votes to actually meet the 2/3 threshold that would be needed to actually get this active. So we've been doing a lot of outreach, trying to figure out the most likely supporters around this. And I say all this not to, imply that this should be a partisan issue, but we do know that there is a little more resistance among the Republican legislators than there is on the Democratic side. So we've been trying to do some outreach. We have not really had anybody engage there. We're continuing to try and chip away at this, but it is something that we are committed to for the long haul. So certainly something that we will continue to work on. If the timing isn't right now, we will keep pressing forward and make sure that we are working with other organizational partners and members.
I think we've lost your sound, Andrea. I don't know whether you can hear us or not.
But in all cases, we're extremely excited about them and want to make sure that you all know about them. You probably have heard, about some of them, but the first I want to mention is an effort that's being headed up by the Secretary of State's office. It's a bill called the Vote Without Fear Act. And this bill is intended to strengthen protections against voter intimidation, which is obviously something the League is extremely concerned about, particularly given the climate that we're in right now. The bill would prohibit a person from carrying a firearm within any polling location or within 100 feet of a ballot drop box. It establishes that violations are a misdemeanor that are punishable by a maximum of $1,000 fine and 364 days imprisonment. The bill is being sponsored by Representative Sullivan and Representative Bacon, as well as Senator Fields. So definitely something that we will continue to be involved in those conversations and be part of the public support to try and get that effort across the finish line. I also want to mention an effort that Representative Lisa Cutter has underway. She is in the process of developing legislation that will provide support for local news outlets. This is tied to her interest in media literacy. And some of you will recall that she successfully ran legislation last year that really was focused on improving media literacy within our K through 12 student population. The League and LAC, of course, was very supportive of that effort. We've been in continuing conversations with her about how we can actually support implementation of that. And sort of a logical next step there was to make sure that people have got good sources of local news. So the information that is coming to them is, fact-based and trustworthy. And then we also want to mention that Senator Gonzalez, Representative Esgar, and Representative Froelich are planning to introduce legislation that will secure the right of reproductive health care, including abortion care. This legislation is intended to be a proactive protection, given the potential for an adverse decision by the US Supreme Court regarding the right to an abortion. So this is legislation that we will be on the lookout for. We'll be very vocal about our support for once LAC has had a chance to take a look at the specific language and assign a position to it. But based on what we know of it, we think that it aligns very well with our organizational position. So we anticipate being a strong supporter of this effort. And I think that this will also tie in nicely to some of the committee and task force work that is underway at the state league level that will be the topic of our next set of discussions. So I won't get into that any further, but make sure that everyone was aware of these forthcoming pieces of legislation that I think really, really speak to our positions and are things that we're really excited about. So with that, those are the specifics that I had. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Andrea, one question was, do you know anything about the Reproductive Health Equity Act that apparently Planned Parenthood and others are seeking to introduce?
you're kind of breaking up for me. I'm not sure if the connection problem was on my end or on yours, but I didn't actually get that.
Oh, let me try again. Can you hear me now? Okay. Between unmute and can you hear me now? Do you know anything about the Reproductive Health Equity Act that may be introduced by Planned Parenthood and others?
You know, without seeing the language, I can't say for sure. I think that that probably is tied into the effort that I just mentioned. But I know that, you know, reproductive health and reproductive health access, you know, is a big area of concern to this session. So I do think that there's a few efforts, but I think it may be tied to that effort that I just referenced.
Okay. And how about single payer? I know that there is a study that has been published with the next step to get it to legislators and hopefully encourage them to actually read it. Anything you know about that?
Well, I don't have a lot of specifics at this point. I know that that's an issue that has been discussed and closely followed by LAC for a few years. Obviously, healthcare costs and access are a huge concern. And, you know, this year is certainly no different. You know, Tony had referenced that there's a lot of tax reduction measures being contemplated. There are other measures that are really aimed at trying to get at cost of living concerns and affordability issues in Colorado. And I think, you know, where healthcare is concerned, this issue ties right into that priority. The complicating factor is there's a lot of differing opinions, I think just from one legislator to another, but certainly between the two major parties in how we actually solve those problems. So, you know, I think it's a big effort. There's going to be folks, whether or not we get to a point where, you know, we see something that can make it through, I think is another question, but it's certainly something that we will be following closely. And our LAC healthcare team is very plugged into that, and we'll have more details as, you know, things start to unfold and, you know, kind of pick up speed.
Susan Stark, I wanted to ask about the Reproductive Health Equity Act. Susan, have you unmuted yourself? If you want to ask that directly.
What I'm wanting to encourage people to do is join the League of Women Voters of Denver on Tuesday, January 18th, at our briefing at 5:30, because we're going to have representatives of Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, Color, Cobalt, and others. And part of what they're going to talk about is that act, which they all have been part of drafting, and about the issues, challenges that we might face in Colorado, and how Colorado is being impacted by what's happening in other states near us in terms of our needing to provide services for people who might be seeking abortions and reproductive health care, and needing to come across state borders to access that. So I put in the chat that you will go to League of Women Voters of Denver's website to register for that, 5:30 this Tuesday, obviously by Zoom. We'd love to have any of you join us for that.
Great, thanks. Thank you for thinking to share that with us. Andrea, will you be able to post the bill's numbers so that League members can track those, and where on the state website would they appear?
So we will be posting our bill lists as we start following and taking positions on legislation. That'll be accessible through the State League website under the Legislative Action Committee webpage within the site. So people will be able to access all of those. The bills that we have referenced, both Tony and I, are either things that, you know, the League is directly involved in regarding development of legislation. So not something that where the data collection issue is concerned, 17-year-old voting and prepaid postage, you know, introduction is not forthcoming on those. Those are, you know, a bit longer term efforts that, you know, we're still really focused on the development stage. The 3 pieces of legislation that I referenced are forthcoming, and we will have those posted once they're introduced and we have the bill number assigned for them. But I did want to flag them because we know that they're important things that, high profile issues that do really align with our organizational position. So I wanted to make everyone aware of those. But yes, certainly we will be posting that. And I also should mention for those who aren't already involved in the LIC, but would potentially like to be, either as a member or even just to listen in here and there. We are getting meetings underway this coming Friday. I believe it's the 21st, from 9 to 11 via Zoom. Everyone is welcome to participate in those. We would welcome it and absolutely encourage broad, diverse participation with really strong local league representation. We would love to see representation from every local league to the extent that we can make that happen. So, if it's something that you're at all interested in, please give it some thought or let Tony or I know, and we can provide more details or talk it over with you if you'd like to get more information.
And do they need to register? Is the easiest way to do that, Andrea, to go onto the website and just register?
It's not so much of a registration type. We don't really require registration. We'll just share the link with anyone that has a need for it, that's interested in participating. We'll use the same link throughout the session. So once you have that, if you want to join in, 1 week but aren't available the next, but next month you are, the same link will still be good.
Will that be posted under the header calendar for the 21st, so that people who may decide at the last minute that they would like to be able to participate, that link is readily available? Can you do that?
I don't believe it's posted. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's not posted publicly for security concerns, but is easily available by emailing me, Andrea, Tony, Laura.
Okay.
And if you know that you want to receive regular communication about the LIC, certainly if you're going to be a member, that's really essential to make sure that you're, looped into all the conversation. But if you're interested more in an observer role, but you do know that you want to receive that communication consistently, we can add you to the LIC email distribution list, but just know that there's a lot of communication that comes out. So we don't want to bombard you with the email unnecessarily, but that would also be one way of making sure that you're always getting, meeting reminders and the link and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, and as Andrea suggested, I want to just reinforce, the LIC is hoping to become even more diverse than they already are. They've got a large number of very active participants, but we'd really love to see the entire state represented on this committee. So if you as she said earlier, you don't have to come and spend hours and hours every time they meet. If there's just some little part of it that you're interested in, any way that you would like to participate would be welcome. So,
and Karen, one thing that I might add that's sort of related to that, but it's an overarching point about some of the legislative activity that took place this week. I did want to make note of the fact that when legislative leadership was outlining priorities for the session, I wanted to flag for all of you that Minority Leader Hugh McKean had specifically noted and praised the expansion of remote testimony, the ability to listen into committee proceedings remotely, and just the increased transparency and opportunities for public participation that this has provided. That's something that's extremely important to the league. In the past, we have, last session, we really emphasized to leadership that this is something that we think is a critical component, pandemic or not. So we would really like to see this continue. And I was really heartened to hear Minority Leader McKean make reference to that as well. So I think, certainly this is maybe kind of a silver lining that has come out of the pandemic. And because of that increased ability to participate remotely, both with our internal operations with LAC and through the expansions that the General Assembly has made, it really just opens up the opportunity for people from, more diverse parts of the state that are far from the metro area, maybe it's not realistic for you to come in person to provide testimony or directly like in person participate in committee hearings, but there's really no reason why it can't be done remotely. So, you know, if that's something that interests you, please keep that in mind.
Right. Right. Yes, that is the silver lining for sure. Well, thanks. I don't see any other questions in the chat at this point. So thank you so much for your presentation this morning, both Andrea and Tony. Please remember that you can get in touch with either one of these individuals or Beth as well if you need additional information. As always, legislative session is exciting. Lots of stuff to consider. The very last item on our agenda is just providing participants today with some information on issue area committees, task force that we are forming here. And so Barbara Dungy from the Arapahoe League, Arapahoe Douglas County League, Sandy Schuster from Jefferson County, and of course Beth will be providing you with additional information in this area. So Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can take the lead on this.
Great, thanks so much, Karen. About a year ago, members of the Jeffco League came to the State League and asked if they could form a statewide committee on the climate emergency. And of course we said yes, and that committee has been going gangbusters and has formed a half a dozen very active subcommittees. And these committees inform the LAC, they inform their local leagues, and it gives members from across the state an additional avenue for action. So we have recently been approached by a couple members of the Arapahoe Douglas League to create a similar committee around healthcare. And Barb Dungy is one of those people. Barb, why don't you tell everyone your motivation for that, if that's all right?
Hi, certainly. And I feel like the others on the Climate Emergency Task Force are better suited to explaining their work since they're the real brains behind the operation. I've been trying to provide tech support to all of them to get the word out. And I just have to tell you that I am just so thrilled that these state committees, task forces, whatever you want to call them, on our advocacy issues, Beth, that you've been such a supportive help to get them created so that all league members in Colorado can share information and work together on these issues. If we can get everybody pulling in the same direction, I really feel that our action will be more effective. What else would you like to know, Beth?
No, that was great right there. Thanks, Barb. And is anybody from the Climate Emergency Task Force who'd like to jump in and talk about your work and how it's developed and evolved?
I may be the only one here.
Great.
I wasn't prepared for this, but we started just before COVID, we started doing this. And actually, that's why you think it's only been a year, but it's actually been 2 years.
Okay.
And it kind of threw us backwards because it took us a while to get going during COVID. But we now have 5 or 6 groups. I'm a part of the plastics group, and we've been sitting in on the development of a bill that's coming up, and it's going to be introduced next week, I think. And it's about producer responsibility for their packaging. So plastics and paper, they'd have to pay extra for recycling the materials. Hopefully that would eventually make them stop packaging so much. But there's also one on energy and on transportation and pollinators. We have a website page on the Jefferson or the Colorado website, which would really be helpful for anybody who's interested. You can just go to the top of the Colorado website and click on climate emergency, and you can find out lots of stuff. And that was created by Barb, by the way.
Great, thanks so much, Sandy. So we are in the midst of developing a statewide committee on healthcare. We know that one subcommittee of that healthcare committee will be around reproductive rights, since we know that there is legislation coming down the pike in that. We're expecting some other subcommittees around prescription drug prices and possibly single payer systems. However, we very much want subcommittees to be created based on member interest. And so Ann Sutton.
I noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat about getting involved in rulemaking, which is a post-legislative kind of activity. And yes, the Climate Emergency Task Force has been addressing this. For example, we did post an action alert about 6 weeks ago having to do with an area of the transportation, reducing the vehicle miles traveled kind of rulemaking. And there's going to be another rulemaking coming up soon this spring, late winter and spring, on the clean fleet enterprise, which has to do with trucks. So, and we'll probably post some information on that. So that's another way that if you have this person asked about the oil and gas bonds that we would like to require. We don't have a committee on oil and gas in the Climate Emergency Task Force, but we'd certainly like to have one. So put yourself forward.
Thanks so much, Ann. The one requirement of these committees as we create them is a link to the LAC, to the Statewide Legislative Action Committee, so that these statewide committees can be informing the LAC and vice versa. So we see this as a great member engagement tool. Some local leagues have their own healthcare committees, some don't. So we hope that your local committees will inform our statewide committee. And for those leagues that don't have that committee, this will be a great member engagement tool. So we expect the next statewide committee to be created will be around housing. And I hope to get that started within the next month. I look forward to hearing from all of you about your ideas as to priorities for other committees. I'll put my email in the chat if y'all don't have it. We're looking forward to hearing from you about this. And if you are interested in any of these statewide committees, please email me. Now I'm going to hand it back to Karen, unless there are any other questions about this.
Let me just piggyback on what you said, Beth. If you will go in, if you will go to the state's website, log in as a member, and then the black banner that is at the top of the page, there is on the far right-hand side, it says members, and you can click on members, and a pull-down menu will show you a number of choices, including forums. And when you click on this, you will see that we have a number of forums under advocacy. The Climate Emergency Task Force is listed there, as well as healthcare, reproductive rights, etc. There is a section on communications. There is a section on leaders, a section on league membership that includes JEDI, membership development, and voter services. So you can click on those. Those are forms. You can access information that has been uploaded to those forms and kind of keep in the loop. And as Beth said, if there are individual leagues or any of today's participants that feel like, gee, we need a task force on this particular topic, then this is a grassroots effort here. This is not a top-down. The forms or the task forces / forms that have been developed at this point, many of them have come from grassroots. So we want to know, you know, what you would like to see us get started, and the state is more than happy to facilitate in any way that we can. So I want to again thank Barb and Beth and Laura and Tony and Andrea for their work on getting today's session organized. I think it's been great. I've learned an awful lot. You guys brought in some wonderful speakers that have certainly expanded our knowledge and understanding on a variety of different topics. If there's anything else that we can do, you know how to get in touch with Beth. I will put my email in the box as well, and I am more than happy for you at any time to get in touch with me as well. I hope that you all found today's session informative and worth your time. And at this point, I'm going to adjourn.
Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Great work. Thank you so much.
Good program.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Great program.
It was a great program. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's clean dishes.
What?
It's clean dishes in the dishwasher. I just washed them.
Is Beth here?
Doesn't look like it. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, Laura, hi. Good. Thanks for all you do. Hi.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you for your contributions. Thanks to all of you.
Great.
That was really wonderful.
Yeah, no problem. Beth had said to me earlier this week that she might want to just share some information with people afterwards, but I think she had to leave, so I can certainly get with her. She's easy to get a hold of.
Yes, and I don't have enough room on my computer apparently to record the Zoom, so Beth had to do it. So it's on her computer. So she will be posting that or sending it to me, and I'll put, one of us will be posting it on YouTube possibly today, but probably Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah, I know it takes some time to, usually you have to clean it up and such. I get it. So, are we good, Laura? Do you need anything? It looks like you and Maud have everything in, like, under control for the election security positions. So
I think so. I mean, Maud and I will definitely be in touch and make sure everything looks good. But yeah, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, Laura, thank you for getting the slide deck uploaded today.
Yes.
We just
it was in a different folder, and I was like, wait, what? But I didn't. Okay, yeah. But there are 2 election security folders on there, so I'll be trying to figure that out.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't find the second one. So if you could send me breadcrumbs to where the second one is, that would be great too. But
yeah, I think I sent you a link in the chat.
I couldn't get.
Okay,
I couldn't get there, but whatever. So.
Yeah, I'll work on that, and I'll send you an email, Mon.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And no, it doesn't have to be today. It was just.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for presenting too. That was fabulous.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you've been through a bunch of these now. And
I don't know about a bunch, but a few. Yeah. It was wonderful. Lots of great information.
Good. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Barbara, thank you for all that you're doing on everything and our side conversations on today on Arapahoe Douglas.
Yeah.
Things going on.
Thanks to Maud adding an extra presentation to our Tuesday night monthly member meeting. We'll have an additional opportunity for, as you know, Laura, for state leaguers to get an extra presentation on the election security positions. So yeah, it should be good.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am going to log off and stop doing league stuff for at least 10 minutes.
It was a great legislative meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really nice. That was my first, so that was a lot of fun.
There's just so much important things going on right now that it's really critical.
Yeah, and it was interesting too. So
yeah.
Okay. Even though I had a 2-year-old in the background at the beginning.
Oh, I didn't. Did you notice? I didn't know.
No, I didn't notice.
No. I had my camera. I was on mute and I had the camera off. And his parents he had asked to come over. His parents called and said, could he come over and could they come over? And so they were. I just
Wonderful. 2-year-old.
Yeah. Well, he's the reason I'm here. So. Okay. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye, Marilyn and Keith too. See it. We've got our. Oh, they took off. Okay. Oh no, there they are. Okay. Yeah, we have good representative from our league. Okay, Laura, thanks for all you do. You do a great job for us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here and do this. So I'm going to end the meeting for everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Hi, Marilyn. Bye-bye.